Final Fantasy VI is a masterpiece. I feel like I really don't have to say this, but I also feel like I have to shout this from a mountaintop. There are all sorts of things I could cover about this game and its many ways of making the player feel things, but I wanted to point out a small section of the game that I think gets overlooked all the time. Namely, the small amount of time that you're on the solitary island. But before that, we gotta back up and talk about a little place called the Opera House. The two are kinda related, and I'll explain why in a bit. But for now, let's focus on the opera scene itself. The opera scene in Final Fantasy VI. Many have talked about it, many have performed it, and a few don't even like it. Here's looking at you, Ultros. But all in all, I think it serves as a resting point in the game, albeit for only a moment. Looking at you again, Ultros. For a brief moment in your travels, you can kind of sit back and watch this love story unfold between Draco and Maria. The only problem with this is, you're not exactly comfortable during this scene because one of your own party members is about to take the stage, and she's not classically trained, for lack of a better term. In fact, she literally gets roped into this just a short time before the opera begins. Good luck, girl, here's your script! The opera kicks off with an introduction of sorts. The East and West are fighting, Maria and Draco are in love, and Draco gets run over by some chocobos, and then sings about Maria. What a rousing good opera! And as soon as Celes, your party member with no opera experience, takes the stage, that's where some similarities start to show, just a little bit. When we meet Celes, we're playing as Locke, treasure hunter. There's a lot of vague conversation, mainly from Locke about keeping her safe and trusting her, so from that we get a sense that something happened a long time ago. He's just not talking about it right now. And that's fair. Also, in the very beginning of the game, Locke says similar things to Terra, but not as heavy-handedly as this. Moving forward a little bit, when Celes meets the rest of the party, it seems as if a few different people know what happened to Locke, but again, it's just all being alluded to. Nothing points to an event and says, here, this is what happened, thank you for playing. That is until you reach Kolingen. With Locke in your party, you learn of exactly what happened in his past that makes him say these things. It's tragic, it's awful, and I hate that Locke had to experience that. I mean, I hate it for Rachel too, but she's not exactly a playable character, so I'm just gonna move on. The party goes to the Opera House to perform a tricky operation of getting an airship. I won't go into full story details about that in this video. You'll have to play it yourself to get all the smaller details of that. The Opera House is on this tiny little island where it's the only thing around. They walk in and take their seats to enjoy the show. Right before the opera begins, Locke goes up to see Celes to give her a pep talk of sorts, but ends up getting embarrassed about seeing Celes in a fancy dress. So because of that, with Celes with Locke freshly on her mind, steps out onto the stage and plays the role of Maria. And I'm gonna stop right here for a second. East and West are fighting in the opera, just like the North and South are fighting in the game story. Maria and Draco have a thing for each other, just like Locke and Celes. In the opera, Maria believes wholeheartedly that Draco has been killed in the war, and in a moment of confirmation, she sees his ghost that turns into a bouquet of flowers, and then he disappears, leading Maria to then take those flowers in a last-ditch effort and tosses them off the balcony. It's a heartbreaking moment, really. But in a turn of events, Draco shows up, and the war is directly in your face now as everyone starts dueling. And then there's Ultros, who literally ruins the opera, but our heroes step in and make sure that their plan goes through anyway, and everyone happily rides off into the sunset. Until... the real war has taken a toll on everything. The difference between the opera and the game story being, instead of Ultros trying and failing to ruin the opera, Kefka succeeds in ruining the entire world. Celes wakes up on a little tiny island with nothing around. She believes wholeheartedly that everyone, especially Locke, has been killed in the war, just like Draco. Does all this start to sound a little familiar now? In a last-ditch effort, she climbs a cliff, just like the balcony in the opera, and instead of flowers being thrown off, she throws herself off in an attempt to stop everything. It's another heartbreaking moment, but in a turn of events, she sees a ghost of Locke in the form of his bandana on a bird that then flies off, giving her a glimmer of hope and a moment of confirmation that at the very least he is still alive somewhere. And then she, alone with nothing but hope and a bandana, rides off into the sunset. And cue the applause, but just understand that you're only halfway done with the game at this point. This is just one of the many scenes that make me love Final Fantasy VI so much. I could go on and on about it and make all sorts of videos, but for now I'll leave this one and move on. The entire series is packed with these types of moments, although this one is the best one to me personally. And speaking of Final Fantasy VI, did you know that Bannon is actually Duncan and it's not just because of a palette swap? You're gonna have to check out this video here to look at all the evidence. Well, sort of all the evidence.